A few months ago, I sat down to do something that should have been very simple. I picked up a book. Not because I was trying to be productive, not because I was doing some kind of digital detox. I simply wanted to spend an hour reading. For the first few minutes, everything felt normal. Then, almost without thinking, I reached for my phone. There wasn't a notification, nobody had texted me, nothing had happened. And yet, for some reason, I felt like I needed to check. I put the phone back down and returned to the book. A few minutes later, I did it again. What bothered me wasn't that I checked my phone. What bothered me was that I couldn't explain why I wanted to. If there was nothing waiting for me, why did my brain suddenly believe there might be? At first, I assumed the answer was obvious. Maybe my attention span had gotten worse. Maybe social media had rewired my brain. Maybe years of scrolling had finally caught up with me. But then I started noticing the same thing everywhere. Friends telling me they couldn't finish books anymore. Students struggling to focus on a single task for more than 20 minutes. People unlocking their phones automatically only to realize they didn't even know why they had picked them up. And that's when this stopped feeling like a personal problem. If millions of people are experiencing the same thing, maybe the explanation isn't personal. Maybe something bigger changed. If that's true, then the question isn't why we can't focus anymore. The question is, what happened to our attention? The obvious answer is social media. If you have spent any time online, you've probably heard some version of that argument already. TikTok destroyed our attention spans, Instagram made us addicted to stimulation, smartphones rewired our brains. Case closed. And honestly, for a while, I thought that was the answer too. The evidence seemed convincing. Screen time was rising, attention spans appeared to be shrinking, people were spending hours every day scrolling through endless feeds. Everything pointed in the same direction. Social media was the problem. But then I started running into something strange. The more I looked into the research, the less satisfying that the explanation became. Because social media felt more like a symptom than a cause. It explained where attention was going, but it didn't explain why every major platform seemed to be competing for it in exactly the same way. Once I noticed that pattern, I couldn't stop seeing it. TikTok was doing it. Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube was doing it. Even apps that had nothing to do with social media seemed obsessed with keeping people engaged for longer and longer periods of time. Which raised a different question. Why was every company suddenly fighting for the same thing? And when I started following that question, it led me to the business model that quietly powers most of the modern internet. Think about how strange the internet actually is. Billions of people use YouTube every day. Billions use Instagram, TikTok, Google, Facebook, some of the largest and most influential products in human history. And yet, most of them are free. That sounds normal because we've grown up with it, but if you stop and think about it for a second, it's actually kind of weird. These companies spend billions of dollars running servers, maintaining infrastructure, hiring engineers, developing software, and operating around the clock. Where does all that money come from? The obvious answer is advertising. But that answer doesn't go far enough, because advertisers aren't really paying for ad space. They are paying for something much more valuable: your attention. The thing being sold isn't the banner. The thing being sold is the chance that you will look at it. And suddenly, a lot of things start making sense. Because if attention is what generates revenue, then every extra second matters, every extra click matters, every extra visit matters. The longer you stay, the more valuable you become. Which means the most successful companies on the internet aren't necessarily the ones that build the best product. They are the ones that become the best at capturing and holding attention. And once attention became profitable, everything else started changing around it. To understand how this happened, we need to go back to 2006. A designer named Azar Ashkim came up with the idea that seemed completely harmless at that time. What if websites never ended? Before this point, websites worked differently. You reached the bottom of a page, you stopped. You made a decision. Do I want more or am I done? That tiny moment mattered more than most people realized, because it created a natural stopping point. Then came infinite scroll. Instead of asking users whether they wanted more content, platforms simply kept loading it automatically. You scroll, more appears. You scroll again, more appears. No button, no pause, no decision, just an endless stream of content. Today, infinite scroll feels so normal that it's hard to imagine the internet without it. But what it really removed wasn't a button. It removed an ending. And once endings disappeared, something important changed. For most of human history, information had a limit. Books ended, newspapers ended, television shows ended, even websites ended. Infinite scroll removed those limits. For the first time, there was another post, another article, another video, another thing competing for your attention. Stopping was no longer by default, continuing was. And that turned out to be incredibly valuable. Infinite scroll worked really well, so platforms kept going. Soon came autoplay, then recommendation algorithms, then personalized feeds, then smart notifications. The machine learning system trained to predict exactly what content would keep you engaged for a few seconds longer. Individually, these features seem harmless. Together, they reveal something much bigger. They reveal an industry-wide competition. Every company was trying to solve the same problem. How do you keep people looking? Not forever, just a little longer, then a little longer after that. What makes this so fascinating is that most of these systems don't feel manipulative. They feel helpful. Autoplay removes friction. Recommendations help you discover new content. Notifications make sure you don't miss anything important. Everything feels like a convenience. But convenience and engagement often point in the same direction. And that's why these systems became so effective. Because the most powerful designs don't force behavior. They shape behavior while making it feel like a choice. There is a concept from psychology that helps explain why all of this works. Imagine walking into a casino. Every slot machine offers the possibility of a reward. Not a guarantee, a possibility. Most pulls result in nothing. But every once in a while, something exciting happens. And that uncertainty is exactly what keeps people playing. Psychologists call this variable reward system. And once you understand it, you start seeing it everywhere online. Every time you refresh your feed, every time you check your notifications, every time you unlock your phone just to see if anything interesting happened, you are participating in the same basic loop. Most of the time, nothing important is waiting for you. But occasionally, there is. There is a message, a funny video, a piece of news, a surprising update. And because your brain never knows when the reward will arrive, it keeps checking again and again and again. Which means the urge I felt while reading that book wasn't random. It wasn't necessarily a failure of self-control. It was a learned response. A response shaped by systems designed to make checking feel rewarding. But here's the part that completely changed how I think about this entire issue. This isn't really a story about social media. It's a story about scarcity. For most of human history, information was scarce. Knowledge was difficult to access. Books were expensive, news traveled slowly. Information itself was valuable because there wasn't much of it. Today, we solved that problem. Information is everywhere. More content is produced every day than any human being could consume in a lifetime. And when something becomes abundant, something else becomes scarce. The scarce resource today isn't information, it's attention. There are more videos than you can watch, more articles than you can read, more podcasts than you can listen to, more notifications than you can respond to. The bottleneck isn't content. The bottleneck is you. Your time, your awareness, your focus. Thousands of companies are competing for exactly the same resource at exactly the same time, your attention. Researchers have a term called attention residue. The idea is simple. When you switch from one task to another, part of your attention stays behind. Piece of your mind remains attached to the previous thing. Now, think about how often we switch contexts every day. Email, message, notification, video, headline, meeting, text, feed. Every switch leaves behind a little residue. Eventually, those fragments start adding up, which means the modern world doesn't just consume our attention. It divides it over and over again. Maybe that's why so many people feel mentally exhausted despite spending most of their days sitting still. Their bodies aren't running a marathon, their attention is. Maybe we are asking the wrong question. Maybe the question isn't why we can't focus anymore. Maybe the question is, how could focus possibly remain unchanged in an environment specifically designed to compete for it? Because for the first time in human history, attention has become one of the most valuable commodities on Earth. Entire industries depend on capturing it. Entire business models depend on keeping it. Entire algorithms are built around predicting where it will go next. The competition follows us to work. It follows us home. It follows us into our bedroom. It lives in our pocket. And it never really stops. So when I think back to that moment sitting on my couch with a book in my hands, I don't see it in the same way anymore. At the same time, I thought I was struggling with focus. I thought something was wrong with me. But now I think I was experiencing something much larger. I was experiencing what it feels like to live inside an attention economy. An economy where thousands of systems are competing every day to influence what we look at, what we think about, and what we do next. The internet gave humanity access to more information than any generation before us could ever imagine. But in the process, it created a new form of scarcity. Not information, attention. And in a world where everything is fighting for your focus, the ability to protect your attention may become one of the most important skills of the 21st century. Because your attention ultimately becomes your life. What you pay attention to shapes what you think about. What you think about shapes what you do, and what you do shapes who you become. Which means the battle for attention isn't really about apps. It's about something much bigger. It's about who gets to decide what your mind spends its time on it. You. Or everyone competing for it. Before you go try something, the next time you unlock your phone, ask yourself one question: what I am looking for? And if you catch yourself opening it without an answer, come back and tell me. I'm really curious how often it happens. If you enjoy videos that dig into systems shaping our everyday lives, consider subscribing. That's what I do here. See you in the next one.